My sister lived rent-free in my house for 6 years with her kids, but when my wife made a garden, she called the neighbors and accused me of abuse. I had to legally evict her, and the neighbors never forgave me. I'm 32 years old, work at a warehouse doing 10-hour shifts, and my marriage almost went to hell because of a garden. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. It all started because I let my younger sister move in with me 6 years ago. And well, I guess she never really left. Now, my wife Sophie and I are basically rebuilding our life after weeks of pure drama, and there are still people in the neighborhood who look at me weird when I go out to take the trash. Let me backtrack a bit so you understand how we got to this mess. Rachel, my sister, got pregnant when she was 19 years old. I was like 26 at the time and had just bought this house. Nothing fancy, like a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. But it was mine, and I was proud of that. Rachel was still living with our parents, and when she told them she was pregnant, well, let's just say they didn't take it well. Our father is one of those old school types who believe that if you get pregnant while single, you basically ruined your life, and our mother just went along with whatever he said. So they started pressuring her to give the baby up for adoption. They yelled at her all the time, made hurtful comments about the baby's father who had taken off as soon as he found out. The atmosphere was super toxic. Rachel called me crying one night, like at 11 at night, and told me she couldn't take it anymore, that if she didn't get out of that house, she was going to go crazy. And I, being the protective older brother, told her to come to my house for a while, just until she had the baby and could get a job in her own place. Temporary, you know what I mean? That was the key word I used, temporary. But, well, you know how that turned out. The first few months were okay, honestly. Rachel was pregnant and felt horrible all the time, so I didn't ask her for rent or anything. She helped with cleaning the house and cooked sometimes, and I thought it was a fair arrangement for the time being. Then Mason was born, her first son, and things got more complicated. Rachel couldn't work because she had no one to leave the baby with, and daycare cost more than she could earn at any entry-level job. I told her, "It's okay. Stay a bit longer. Save money when you can. There's no rush." I think that was my first mistake. Not setting clear boundaries from the beginning. The years went by faster than I expected. Mason grew up, started walking, talking, and Rachel was still in my house. She got little gigs here and there, like selling stuff online or doing cleaning when my mother could watch Mason, but never anything stable. I worked my warehouse shifts, paid all the bills, bought the groceries, basically kept the house running. Rachel contributed when she could, maybe 100 or 200 bucks a month if she'd had a good month. But it was never consistent, and honestly, I never pushed her too hard because, well, she's my sister and I wanted to help her. Then 4 years ago, I met Sophie at a barbecue that a friend from work threw. Sophie is amazing. Seriously. She has this positive energy that just makes you feel good, and from the beginning we connected. She knew Rachel lived with me from our first date because I mentioned it casually. Sophie didn't seem to have a problem with that at first. We dated for 3 years before getting married, and during that time, Sophie came to the house often, met Rachel and Mason. Everything seemed fine. But then, and this is important, Rachel got pregnant again. She was like 23 at the time, and honestly, I thought she had learned her lesson. But no. Another guy she met on a dating app who disappeared as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. I was frustrated. I'm not gonna lie, but what was I gonna do? Throw her out on the street while she was pregnant? So I told her it was okay, she could stay, but that she seriously needed to start planning how to get her own place. Eventually, she promised me she would, that after having the baby she was going to look for a full-time job and save money. Spoiler alert, that never happened. Ethan was born when Rachel was 24, and by that point Sophie and I were pretty serious. Sophie started making comments about the situation. Nothing aggressive at first. Just like, does Rachel have any plans to move out soon? Or, do you think we should talk about her contributing more to the bills? I always defended Rachel, told Sophie that my sister was doing the best she could, that raising 2 kids alone was hard, that she just needed more time. Sophie would let it go, but I could see it bothered her. Sophie and I got married 2 years ago in a small ceremony, nothing fancy, just close family and a few friends. Rachel was there with the kids, and everything was normal. But then Sophie officially moved into the house a year ago, and that's when things started getting weird. Before, Sophie would come and go, but now, this was her home too, and she wanted to make changes, decorate, organize things differently. Rachel started getting defensive about everything, like, "This room is mine, don't touch my stuff, the kids need this space to play." There was this constant tension in the air that I tried to ignore because, honestly, I was exhausted from working all day and then coming home and having to mediate between my wife and my sister. Sophie is a gardener, or at least she loves gardening. It's her passion, her way of relaxing after her job at an office where she's basically in front of a computer 8 hours a day. Our house has a front yard. It's not big, maybe like 150 square feet of lawn and some half-dead plants that were there when I bought the house. Mason and Ethan played there sometimes. They had a ball and a portable basketball hoop that I'd bought them. But it wasn't like it was their only play area. They also had the backyard. Sophie started planning this garden project, researching native plants, designing layouts on her computer, watching YouTube videos about how to create low-maintenance gardens. I watched her get so excited about this and I thought it was great. Like, if this makes her happy and beautifies the house, why not? Sophie hired some guys to come do the heavy work, rip out the old grass, prepare the soil, install an irrigation system, the things you need professionals to do right. She scheduled everything for a Saturday when I'd be at work, because my shift that day was from 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. Here's the problem. Sophie didn't tell Rachel anything about the garden plans. Nothing. Zero communication. I didn't tell Rachel either because, honestly, I didn't think it was necessary. It's my house. Sophie is my wife. If we want to make a garden in our front yard, we don't need permission from someone living there rent-free, right? Well, clearly that was a wrong assumption on my part. That Saturday, the contractors arrived at like 8 in the morning with their trucks and tools and started working. Rachel was inside with the kids, probably still in pajamas because on weekends she woke up late. I guess she heard the noise outside, looked out the window, and saw these guys literally ripping up the grass where her kids played. And she lost it. Rachel ran out of the house screaming, like hysterical, yelling at Sophie what the hell was she doing, that this was her kids' play space, that she couldn't just destroy it without telling her anything. Sophie tried to calm her down and explain about the garden, but Rachel wasn't listening. She started yelling at the contractors too, telling them to stop, that they didn't have authorization to be there, that this was illegal. The contractors, obviously confused because Sophie had hired them and given them all the information, didn't know what to do. One of them pulled Sophie aside and asked if they should leave, and Sophie told them no, to keep working because she lived there and had every right to make modifications to the property. So here's where things got really ugly. Linda, our neighbor across the street, came out of her house. Linda is Rachel's friend. She's also a single mom, and I think Rachel identified with her. Linda came over and started supporting Rachel, telling Sophie she was being disrespectful, that she couldn't just make changes without consulting everyone who lived in the house. Sophie tried to explain that she was the owner of the house along with me, that Rachel was only living there temporarily, but Linda didn't believe her or didn't care. And then Linda did something that basically changed everything. She called the police. Linda called 911 and reported that there was unauthorized construction work happening on my property, that someone was destroying the property without the owner's consent. I don't know exactly what she told them, but she convinced them that something suspicious was happening. The police arrived like 20 minutes later, 2 officers, and started asking questions. Rachel told them she lived there, that she had lived there for years, and that Sophie had hired these guys without her knowledge or permission. Sophie tried to explain that she was the wife of the house owner and that she had every right to make modifications. But here's the problem. My name was the only one on the house deed because I'd bought it before marrying Sophie. The officers asked Sophie for documentation, proving she lived there legally and had authorization to make modifications. Sophie had our marriage license in the house and some utility bills in her name, but the officers said that wasn't enough because I wasn't there to confirm she had permission to do the work. Rachel, on the other hand, had an ID with my address because she had updated her driver's license years ago to use my house as her official address. In the eyes of the police, this was a tenant dispute, and because I wasn't there to clarify the situation Rachel had said she didn't authorize the work. They decided the safest thing was to ask Sophie to leave the property temporarily until I got home and could clear everything up. Sophie was devastated, humiliated, furious, all at the same time. She had to go into the house, pack an overnight bag with clothes and her personal things, and leave while Rachel watched her from the window. The contractors also left because, obviously, they weren't going to continue working with all this legal situation happening. Sophie called me crying while I was still at the warehouse, probably at 10 in the morning, and told me everything. I was so angry, I literally had to take my break early and go outside to process what she was telling me. I told her to go to her sister's house, that I would get out of work as soon as I could and fix everything. I managed to leave work at like 1 in the afternoon, told my supervisor I had a family emergency and left. When I got home, Rachel was in the living room with the kids watching TV like nothing had happened. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I sat down in front of her and asked her what the hell had happened, even though Sophie had already told me her version. Rachel started with this long explanation about how Sophie had no right to destroy her kids' play space without consulting her, that she lived there too, and deserved to be included in decisions that affected her family. I told her, "Rachel, this is my house, not yours. Sophie is my wife. She lives here legally. And if we want to make a garden in our front yard, we don't need your permission." Rachel looked at me like I had slapped her. She told me she couldn't believe I was taking Sophie's side over hers, that she was my sister, that she had raised her kids in this house, that this was her home too. And then she said something that froze me. She told me she had tenant rights because she had lived there for more than 6 months. That legally, I couldn't just kick her out without a formal eviction process. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister, who I had helped unconditionally for years, was basically threatening me with tenant laws. I asked her if she was really playing that card, if she was really willing to destroy our family relationship over this. She started crying and said she had nowhere to go, that she couldn't afford an apartment, that her kids needed stability. I told her I understood, the situation was difficult, but that this couldn't continue, that she needed to find her own place. Rachel refused to leave. She literally told me she wasn't going to move unless I forced her legally. I was so furious, but also exhausted, like, how did we get to this point? When did my sister become so entitled? That night, I stayed at a hotel with Sophie, because neither of us wanted to be in the house. Sophie was devastated, feeling like she had no home in her own house, and I felt trapped between my wife and my sister, not knowing how to fix this without someone getting hurt. For the next day, a Sunday, I went to see a lawyer that a friend from work had recommended. I explained the whole situation to him, that my sister had lived rent-free in my house for years and now refused to leave. The lawyer confirmed what Rachel had said. She technically had tenant rights under state law, even without a formal contract or rent payment, because she had established residence there for more than 6 months. I needed to give her a formal 60-day notice to move out, and if after those 60 days she didn't leave, then I would have to start a formal eviction process in court. The lawyer charged me $300 for the consultation and gave me a template for the notice. On Monday, I went back to the house after work and gave Rachel the 60-day notice. I put it in her hand and told her, "I'm sorry, Rachel, but you need to leave. You have 2 months to find another place." She read it and started crying again, saying I was being cruel. How could I do this to her and her kids? The kids, Mason and Ethan, were there and started asking what was happening, why Uncle Daniel was making their mom cry, and I felt like the worst human being on the planet. But I also knew this had to happen. I couldn't keep allowing Rachel to live in my house indefinitely while my marriage fell apart. The following weeks were the worst of my life. I'm not gonna lie. Sophie stayed at her sister's house, only visiting when Rachel wasn't there to pick up more clothes or her things. Rachel barely spoke to me. When I got home from work, she would go into her room with the kids. The house felt like a Cold War zone. Linda, the neighbor, stopped talking to me too, and apparently Rachel had told her version of the story to half the neighborhood because I started getting disapproving looks when I went out to my own yard. Rachel dragged her feet during the first 4 weeks of the notice period. She didn't look for apartments, didn't pack anything, basically acted like the notice didn't exist. I would send her links to affordable apartments, offered to help her with the security deposit and first month's rent, because I wanted this to end well, or at least not end horribly. She ignored my messages or responded with things like, "I can't afford that," or "That neighborhood isn't safe for my kids." There was always an excuse. Finally, at like 5 weeks, I told her that if she didn't start actively looking for a place and packing her things, I was going to have to proceed with the formal eviction, which meant going to court, having a hearing, and potentially having marshals remove her belongings from the house. I didn't want to get to that, I told her, but she was leaving me with no options. I think she finally realized I was serious because a few days later, she started looking at apartments and packing some boxes. Sophie and I talked on the phone every day during this period. She was being super patient with me, but I could hear in her voice that she was tired of this whole situation. She asked me several times if I was sure I wanted to go through with this, if I wouldn't rather just let Rachel stay to avoid more family drama. But I told her no, that this had to happen, that we needed our house back, that our marriage needed space to grow without all this constant tension. Rachel finally found a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex like 30 minutes from my house. It wasn't the best place in the world. Honestly, the building looked a bit old, and the neighborhood wasn't super nice, but it was affordable, and they accepted her application despite her mediocre credit history. I kept my promise and gave her $2,000 to cover the deposit and first month, plus another $500 for her to buy things she needed like curtains and kitchen items. I took it out of my savings. Money that Sophie and I had been saving to maybe take a trip or renovate the kitchen, but it seemed more important to make sure Rachel and the kids were okay. On day 59 of the notice period, Rachel was still packing. I took the day off work to help her. I hired 2 friends from the warehouse to come with their trucks and help load the furniture. It was a long and exhausting day. Going up and down stairs, packing boxes, taking apart beds and furniture. The kids were confused and sad. Mason asked me why they had to leave, if I didn't love them anymore. That broke my heart. I told him I loved them very much, that I was always going to be their uncle, and they could visit me whenever they wanted, but that their mom needed her own space now. Rachel barely spoke to me during the move. When we finished loading everything in the trucks and were ready to go to the new apartment, she finally looked at me and said, "Thanks for helping me move." I guess it didn't even sound sincere. It sounded sarcastic and bitter. I just nodded because I didn't have energy for another confrontation. We went to the Grove apartment, unloaded everything, set up the basic bed so the kids could sleep that night, and then I left. There was no goodbye hug, no emotional reconciliation, just a curt goodbye, and that was it. Sophie moved back into the house the next day. We cleaned Rachel's room, painted the walls, changed all the sheets, basically did a fresh start. The contractors came back to finish the garden, and now we have this beautiful front yard with native plants and a stone path, exactly like Sophie had planned it. It looks amazing, honestly. And Sophie is happy again. But there's this feeling of sadness that I can't completely shake. Rachel and I talk maybe once every 2 weeks now. Brief and superficial conversations about how the kids are or if she needs anything. She's never admitted she was wrong, or that maybe she took advantage of my generosity for too long. I haven't apologized to her for kicking her out either, because honestly, I don't think I have anything to apologize for. I did what I had to do to protect my marriage and my sanity. Linda, the neighbor, still gives me disapproving looks. The other day I saw her at the supermarket, and she literally turned around and went down another aisle when she saw me approaching. Some other neighbors who were friendly with Rachel also treat me differently now. I guess in their eyes, I'm the bad brother who kicked his sister and nephews out onto the street. It doesn't matter if I explain to them that Rachel lived rent-free for 6 years, that I gave her 2 full months' notice and money to move, that I did everything legally and with as much compassion as possible given the circumstances. People are going to think what they want to think. Sophie and I are fine now. Better than fine, actually. Without all that constant tension in the house, we can just be a normal couple. We have dinner together without drama, watch movies in the living room without having to negotiate what to watch with Rachel, sleep without hearing the kids running, up and down the hallways at 6 in the morning. It's peaceful, and we desperately needed that peace. Sophie is working on her garden almost every day after work, and I can see she's genuinely happy. That's what matters at the end of the day. Do I feel guilty? Of course I do. Rachel is my sister, and a part of me will always feel like I failed her somehow. Maybe I should have established clearer boundaries from the beginning. Maybe I should have insisted she pay at least some rent or contribute more consistently to the household expenses. But I also know I did the right thing eventually. I couldn't keep sacrificing my marriage and my own happiness for someone who had clearly become too comfortable living off my generosity without real plans to become independent. The kids miss me. That's what hurts the most. Mason sent me a drawing last week, a drawing of him and me playing basketball, and at the bottom he wrote, "I miss you, Uncle Daniel." I almost cried when I saw it. I sent Rachel a message asking if I could take the kids out for pizza this weekend, and she said yes, so I guess that's something. I don't know if my relationship with Rachel will ever be what it was before. Probably not, but I hope we can at least maintain some kind of connection for the kids' sake. At the end of the day, I learned that helping family doesn't mean letting yourself get trampled on or sacrificing your own happiness indefinitely. There's a line between being generous and being a doormat, and I crossed that line a long time ago. It took me 6 years and almost losing my marriage to realize that, but I finally did. And while there are days when I wonder if I handled everything the best way possible, I know I made the right decision for Sophie and for me. Our house is our home again, and that has to be enough for now.